Okay. So we all know the story of Woodstock. We knew about the couple on the album cover, we know who played and when, we know about the rain and the festival running late. So late they ended up with a fourth day of a 3-day festival just so the headlining act could play. We know about the traffic jam and the helicopters. Bob Dylan was a rumored surprise guest, seeing as he lived just outside Woodstock at the time, it wasn't out of the question. He held out on making his grand return to the stage until Isle of Wight. Not many people know about the mini festival of local musicians that took place in Back, that Jeff Beck broke up his band, or that Iron Butterfly got stuck at the airport, but you know now. Just as Woodstock made Joe Cocker a superstar overnight, a lackluster showing by the ISB just about ended their career. We know Neil Young was weird about being filmed, and we know Sly and the Family Stone delivered one of the best sets of their career, despite it being 4 o'clock in the morning on day 3 in the middle of a field on a farm. They brought the house down. But what you might not know is that 7 weeks before Woodstock, Sly and the Family Stone played another festival in New York. About 100 miles out from Woodstock, an annual celebration of black art and music was held. Every Sunday afternoon that summer, a stage on 124th Street between Lenox and Park Avenue held some of the biggest names in pop, rock, funk, soul, gospel, jazz, and more. This concert series was nothing to scoff at. It drew over 300,000 people in total. That's roughly the same amount of people that saw Jimi Hendrix at Woodstock. But after the trash was picked up, the stage was dismantled for the year, and the film stowed away, the festival didn't come back the next year. Or the year after that. Or the year after that. For 52 years, the world forgot the 3rd annual Harlem Cultural Festival. Or did they? Hi, I'm Abby, I have a lot of records, and this is the story of the Black Woodstock. So welcome back, or welcome if this is your first time here. Vinyl Monday is the who, what, when, where, why, and how do I feel about classic albums in my collection. If deep dives aren't your thing, don't worry. I also do Vinyl Monday in 60 seconds here on my channel, over on my Instagram, as well as TikTok. So, about 5 months ago, I wrote a 55th anniversary special on Woodstock. I only briefly mentioned the events we'll be covering today. I promised to write a feature on that too, and here we are. By the time you're seeing this, God willing you're seeing this Mars retrograde has been kicking my ass. Questlove's second documentary will be out. I cannot wait to see this one. You bet I will be watching it on release weekend. There's no better time than the present to cover his directorial debut. This week's album is the soundtrack for Summer of Soul, or When the Revolution Could Not Be Televised. Congrats if you guessed this one. Remember, if you want to play along, all you gotta do is check out my community tab. That's where I post my hints to what the next album is gonna be, I make announcements, I host polls, you can find all of that on my channel. And if you so choose, you can always read the written version of my reviews on my website, linked in the description. Alright, let's take the plastic off. So my copy is an original. This is the mass market release distributed in the United States and Canada. The vinyl copies of the soundtrack feature Max Roach and Abby Lincoln's Africa, which apparently the standard CD release doesn't have. If you have the CD, let me know why this is. It's gonna be a little tricky to talk about the cover art today because we have no credited photographer, but the design is credited to Frank Harkins. The cover shows 4 featured performers of the Summer of Soul documentary: Nina Simone, Sly Stone, Sister Mahalia Jackson, and Marilyn McCoo of the Fifth Dimension. This design mirrors the cover of the streaming release, but these shots have more motion to them. They're blurry, like you've caught them right before you blink, or like they're suspended in a memory. It's fitting. A lot of the Summer of Soul commentary has to do with memories. Opening up, The gatefold, B-roll Abby will be able to show you this a lot better, is a photograph of mother and child overlooking the crowd at Mount Morris State Park, where the Harlem Cultural Festival took place. On the inserts, we have the track listing repeated from the back cover with liner notes by Questlove. The Summer of Soul soundtrack features performances by the Chambers Brothers, B.B. King, The Fifth Dimension, David Ruffin, the Edwin Hawkins Singers, the Staple Singers, the Operation Breadbasket Orchestra and Choir featuring Mahalia Jackson and special guest Mavis Staples, Gladys Knight and the Pips, whose look I've referenced today, Mongo Santa Maria, Ray Barretto, Herbie Mann and his ensemble including Sonny Sharrock, Abby Lincoln with Max Roach, Sly and the Family Stone, and Nina Simone. The Summer of Soul soundtrack was of course produced by Questlove. Roll transition. To understand the selections of music we're hearing here, we must first understand why the Harlem Cultural Festival happened in the first place. It's the late 1960s, and shit is about to hit the fan. On April 3rd, 1968, Martin Luther King was assassinated. This was a devastating loss to the Black community, who were still mourning the death of Malcolm X. Within, a whole generation of Americans still mourning JFK. MLK's killing triggered the Holy Week uprising. Protests were held in over 200 cities, riots erupted in many, 43 people were killed, and many more injured. King's death divided the Black community. Some stayed his course of nonviolence, while others concluded that more radical means were needed to get some justice. In June of '68, RFK was assassinated. American politics spiraled into chaos and confusion, the likes of which we haven't seen until about now. The DNC nominated a weak candidate in Kennedy's place, Chicago blew up like a powder keg in the background, and in the end, America elected a crook. Speaking of the '68 DNC riots, in March of '69, the Chicago Eight were indicted. This included Black Panther Party co-founder Bobby Seale. The case against him was thin to begin with. He was hardly in Chicago the week of the convention. The Chicago Eight eventually became the Chicago Seven, but that's a whole other story. Though membership of the Black Panther Party peaked between 1969 and 1970, COINTELPRO is on their asses. And the asses of anybody else who aligned with the Black Panthers. Hello, White Panthers. Hello, Gene Seberg. Bobby is embroiled in even more trouble in Connecticut in May with his alleged involvement in the murder of Alex Rackley. His death and the subsequent trial marked a turning point in public support of the Black Panthers. Speaking of trials, the Panther 21 are currently on trial in New York. As far as the Vietnam War goes, all young people have skin in the game. The draft affects them the most. This issue is magnified in the Black community. In 1967, 25% of combat deaths in Vietnam were Black men. This was lowered to just over 12% by 1969, but still, Black men were more likely to be drafted and disproportionately represented on the front lines. All these issues and more were amplified in Harlem, struggling with poverty and the heroin epidemic. Something was needed to unite the masses. Back in 1964, promoter and sometimes singer Tony Lawrence had the idea for the Harlem Cultural Festival, a series of events to bring summer fun to Harlem. Early iterations had carnival rides, go-karts, boxing matches, even a beauty pageant. This was backed by the Parks Commissioner and the mayor. By the time the third annual festival rolled around, Tony wanted to focus more on music. Pop culture in the 60s was ruled by music, and he no doubt saw how well Monterey Pop did in '67. New York needed a festival more than ever. After so much rioting through the country over the past few years and such a tense political climate, they needed a distraction to keep people from burning the city down. Authorities knew if New York went up in flames, it'd be catastrophic. Like dropping a lit match into a dynamite factory. But if they were gonna have a full-fledged 6-week music festival, it needed to be backed by the city. Since these shows would be free, artists needed to know they'd get paid. This was a huge problem with free shows back in the 60s. A lot of Woodstock acts just never got paid. This would cause a Category 5 clusterfuck when it came time to edit the film and the soundtrack, but that's a story for another day. Enter Mayor John Lindsay. Conveniently, he's seeking re-election and wants to ensure his standing with Black and Puerto Rican voters. And what part of New York is mostly Black and Puerto Rican? Harlem. Once again, the city backs the festival. In all all areas except security. Whereas Woodstock would have police and Hells Angels, the Harlem Cultural Festival had the Black Panthers. The NYPD got involved later, but organizers kept the Panthers around. Tony still needed a little financial boost to incentivize big names to play. The city would only pay so much. One thing about Tony is he is persuasive as hell. This whole festival was basically built on half promises and contingencies and a couple white lies here and there. This man convinced Maxwell's Coffee to sponsor the event. The committee selected to stage it at Mount Morris State Park because it could handle 30 to 40,000 people at a time. As for the lineup, Tony wanted acts that would represent the full breadth of Black American music at the time, like the blues, B.B. King. For gospel, Mahalia Jackson was the obvious choice. She wasn't just a gospel singer, she was a household name. She had restaurants, she had a line of TV dinners, and she performed Martin Luther King's favorite song, Precious Lord, Take My Hand. Though the Edwin Hawkins Singers had a runaway hit with Oh Happy Day, one of the inspirations for George Harrison's My Sweet Lord,
When Jesus was, oh, sweet Lord.
they were an unlikely choice. You see, they were Pentecostal. They were shunned by their own church for performing alongside secular acts. The Staple Singers struck the balance between gospel and blues, playing old school R&B. You have Chuck Jackson. Motown dominated the 60s. It had to be represented. Lucky for the Harlem Cultural Festival, David Ruffin of The Temptations has just gone solo. Motown provided Gladys Knight and the Pips, Stevie Wonder at an interesting point in his career. He's rounding out his soul singer arc before embarking on what would be Motown's first explicitly political soul album. Seeing as this is Harlem, jazz had to be represented. Herbie Mann with guest guitarist Sonny Sharrock, Max Roach on drums for Abby Lincoln, Hugh Masekela's here. They snagged besties Mongo Santa Maria and, personal favorite of mine, Ray Barretto. Comedy acts like Willie Taylor and Moms Mabley were included, as were traditional African performers. No festival is without its pop act. Sly and the Family Stone's latest LP, Stand, was making waves. Everyday People is still their greatest hit. But Sly already had a reputation for being unreliable. He was fashionably late if he showed up at all. When he did, he was high as a friggin' kite. The Chambers Brothers and the Fifth Dimension were also called in. The latter had the biggest selling single of 1969 with their medley from Hair. Last but not least, soul icon Nina Simone. Aretha Franklin was supposed to perform but canceled at the last minute. Hal Tulchin was approached to film these shows. He'd previously filmed the 68 festival. Unfortunately, this footage has never seen the light of day. The 69 festival was intended to be a series of TV specials. CBS aired the first in July of 69 while the festival was going on. A gospel special for ABC aired in September. And the rest just vanished. For over 30 years, the footage sat in Hal's basement. He tried to sell it as the Black Woodstock, but after Woodstock was such a big success, no buyers were interested. In the decades to follow, this lost Black Woodstock project became something of a myth, until Robert Fievelint caught wind of it. One of his buddies was working on an R&B documentary and wanted to track down this footage because at this point it was only thought to exist. That's a running theme we'll see throughout this video, people not being sure of the Harlem Cultural Festival's existence. Robert and his buddy track down Hal, convince him they're serious about making this project. Hal signed the contract to let them use his footage. The project moves forward in 2004, but after only about a year, funding runs out. Cue 12 more years of production hell until 2017, when artist, producer, author, and Roots drummer Questlove is approached to direct. Not only had he never directed a film before, he'd never heard of the Harlem Cultural Festival. He too was skeptical of its existence. Then why was he on the short list of directors? Producer David Dinerstein explained it's because he's a storyteller and known music geek. He'd know how best to tell this story. In fact, the producers were so convinced of Questlove's fitness for this project, they tracked him down on the set of The Tonight Show. Though he may not have known about the festival as a kid, as he described in an interview with the National Museum of American History, stories like this one were the ones little Questlove needed. When he saw the footage, he was sold. And he realized he'd actually seen one of those TV specials. He'd seen a clip at some random cafe in Japan. Of course, Questlove was going to produce the soundtrack too. That's kind of a no-brainer. For some reason, his involvement wasn't announced until 2019, when he says in interview he signed on in 2017. This film with the working title Black Woodstock was pitched and rejected many times. Cue another 2 years of production hell because of the but this gave the crew a unique advantage. They could go out and find people who were at the Harlem Cultural Festival. Harnessing the power of social media, Questlove sent up the bat signal on his Twitter. Later, the crew sent people to Harlem asking around, hey, did you or your parents or your aunt and uncle go to this festival? As for the soundtrack, believe it or not, these are the soundboard recordings. Despite being recorded in open air in mono, the sound was remarkably good. Very little remastering had to be done, if any. Questlove considered including songs that didn't make the final cut, but ultimately decided to only use songs cleared for the film. I imagine his rationale was something along the lines of, it's been 52 goddamn years, production has taken long enough. The rest of the material was saved for a potential deluxe edition. The track listing of the Summer of Soul soundtrack goes as follows. Opening up disc 1, we have the Chambers Brothers performing Uptown, followed by B.B. King with Why I Sing the Blues. Then The Fifth Dimension with Don't You Hear Me Callin' to Ya, and side 1 closes with a medley of Age of Aquarius and Let the Sunshine In. Opening up side 2, we have David Ruffin with My Girl, the Edwin Hawkins Singers performing Oh Happy Day, the Staple Singers with It's Been a Change, and closing out disc 1 is the Operation Breadbasket Orchestra and Choir featuring Mahalia Jackson and Mavis Staples with Precious Lord Take My Hand. Opening up disc 2, we have Gladys Knight and the Pips performing I Heard It Through the Grapevine, followed by Mongo Santa Maria with Herbie Hancock's Watermelon Man, then Ray Barretto Together, and closing side 3 is Herbie Mann with Hold On, I'm Coming. Opening up side 4, we have Sly and the Family Stone playing Sing a Simple Song and Everyday People, followed by Abby Lincoln and Max Roach with John Coltrane's Africa. Then Nina Simone with Backlash Blues, and the album closes with Are You Ready? Summer of Soul, or When the Revolution Could Not Be Televised, finally premiered in June of 2021. 52 years after the 3rd annual Harlem Cultural Festival. The soundtrack didn't come out until early 2022. I'm pretty sure this was because of supply chain issues left over from the FFMMA. It's been 5 years and you'll still get demonetized for saying that word. Sadly, this Harlem Cultural Festival would be the last. Tony couldn't secure the funding to take the show on the road like he wanted. He had a falling out with a number of organizers, including Hal, over ownership of the footage. Tony said it was rightfully his since he was setting up his own production company. Hal said, hell no, it's my idea to sell. Questlove did the press circuit for this film. This became crucial for my research process. When Summer of Soul finally premiered at the Sundance Film Festival, it won the Grand Jury Award and the Audience Choice Award. It won an Oscar for Best Documentary, a distribution deal was signed with Hulu, and it was off to the races. The Harlem Cultural Festival's misfortune has not evaded Summer of Soul, though. The film was received well, people love the soundtrack, but after nearly 4 years, the planned deluxe edition still hasn't come to fruition. At this point, especially with this new Sly documentary out, it's unlikely we'll ever get a deluxe version of Summer of Soul. But I'm going to put my thoughts on this Summer of Soul on the back burner for now. What do I think of this Summer of Soul? In an interview with the National Museum of American History, Questlove spouted one of those filmmaker cliches. His goal was to, quote, let the story tell itself, let it unfurl and bring it to the people. No story tells itself, especially on film. There's a whole ecosystem of people behind the scenes: directors, producers, cinematographers, editors, coordinators, set designers, engineers, and of course, the stars. I'm gonna reiterate the same point I make in all of my joint point film and soundtrack reviews. No documentary is unbiased, everybody's got a story to tell. With this chapter, I intend to answer the following questions. What story was Questlove trying to tell with Summer of Soul? How did he tell it? And was he successful? Firstly, there's one pretty big difference between Woodstock and Summer of Soul. With Woodstock, Michael Wadley and his guys were on the ground in the mud filming all of this as it happened. That same team edited it and presented it to the world. Seeing as Questlove was born in 1971, he clearly wasn't at the 1969 Harlem Cultural Festival. This puts him in an interesting position as director. He's walked into this thing decades after the fact. That's not to discount Questlove's role in any way, though this was his very first film. I believe he was the right guy for the job. He's an author and educator, which means he's knowledgeable and a good storyteller. He's an artist and talented producer, which means he's imaginative. With Summer of Soul, Questlove and his crew seek to do two things: preserve the Harlem Cultural Festival and tell Black history through music. Film primarily tells story through images, and even after multiple viewings, I am struck by how Summer of Soul looks. It's so colorful. The yellow stage with its charming mid-century geometry, the costumes, the whole summer. I didn't realize how muddy Woodstock looked, and was, in comparison to the Harlem Cultural Festival. The Woodstock kids got rained on for days straight, and no one showered for at least the whole weekend. I make clothes. Of course I'm gonna notice the fashion. Clothing is a reflection of history, and Summer of Soul is an amazing cross-section of Black fashion in the 1960s. The Motown guys were still pretty traditional. You have the Pips in their sharp-tailored matching khaki suits, and David Ruffin's 1950s horn-rimmed sunglasses. It's in line with the respectability politics of the day. See Dr. King and his associates always wearing shirts and ties. However nice David's salmon shirt and bow tie are, his black wool coat and pants are baffling. My buddy, my guy, it is the middle of summer. We see hippie fashion enter the fray with the Fifth Dimension stage garb. Orange suede fringe, earth-toned bell-bottoms, yellow balloon sleeves, and dagger collars. I couldn't help but reference that today. When the moon is in the seventh house. When you basically have the outfit, you gotta wear the outfit. I noticed the stark difference between Motown gal Gladys Knight with her big hair and Mary Tyler Moore outfit versus Nina Simone, her draped yellow textiles and envy-inducing earrings. Just like the music was at a crossroads, gospel infiltrating the mainstream through Oh Happy Day, Afro-Caribbean sounds seeping into rock and roll, the birth of jazz fusion, the rebirth of Motown. Naturally, the fashion is at a crossroads too. All of this is reflected in the audience. You guys, this is the best dressed audience I have ever seen. We see shark skin, window pane checked suits, and tilted fedoras, the same as we see hair wraps and headscarves. Chic sunglasses, bright colors, the most beautiful woman you've ever seen in pink lipstick and a white lace veil. She looks like she skipped out on her own wedding to be here. And you just see this sea of afros and dashikis. I touched on Afrocentrism a little bit in the Maggot Brain episode. 1969 was the beginning of a decade of Black people shedding beauty standards set by white people and referencing their own ancestry. No one's fashion sense, though, tops absolute icon Tony Lawrence. One of the highlights of the whole film is his fit montage. Whether ascots, dashikis, pastel suits, or flamenco-inspired neon ruffles, Tony consistently serves. Men's fashion hit its all-time peak in the late 60s and early 70s because there were just no rules. You could do whatever the hell you wanted. Tony plays host, MC, lounge comedian, even preacher. He's the thread that stitches all of these seemingly disparate acts together. He's making cracks at the mayor. He's introducing Jesse Jackson. He's the life force of Summer of Soul, as are the talking heads, of which there are many. Maybe too many? We really do hear from everyone in this documentary, even the zebra from Madagascar. While the edit is razor sharp, it never loses its steam. The musical catharsis sequence in particular is incredible. Summer of Soul should have favored the music over the commentary. This edit with this runtime just couldn't let the performances breathe like they should. I'm really not sure we needed to hear about Stevie Wonder from Oscar's Slappy, Chris Rock. As much as us Zoomers dunk on Lin-Manuel Miranda for being cringy, it was good to have a modern Nuyorican talk about the original Nuyorican. Modern features like this connect the Harlem Cultural Festival's history to contemporary history. It makes it more relatable to us. My personal favorite interviewees were Charlene Hunter-Gault and Musa Jackson. Charlene was one of the first two students to integrate the University of Georgia and was the first New York Times journalist to use the term Black in an article. Her story brings Nina Simone's To Be Young, Gifted, and Black to life. Though it may not have been that record specifically, Charlene used Nina's albums to power her through the unimaginably isolating experience of being the first and only Black girl at a school full of people preying on your downfall. If us viewers, especially ones who look like me, didn't have a face to associate with Young, Gifted, and Black, we do now. Musa is the talking head we hear from the most, the second star of the film alongside Tony. Summer of Soul both starts and ends with him. Musa was only 5 years old when he attended the Harlem Cultural Festival. These are some of his earliest memories. He remembers owning a dashiki, his mom selling chicken and beer and balloons outside the park, being transfixed by his first crush, Marilyn McCoo. He was just a kid experiencing this historical moment. It's reflected in Summer of Soul's beautiful opening sequence. We see a man in his late 50s, sat in front of a screen we can't see. A voice off-screen asks him, "So, do you remember the Harlem Cultural Festival?" Whatever Musa sees, he's absolutely transfixed. You see the childlike wonder in his eyes. We hear the hum of the crowd. The summer afternoon is glowing and hazy like a dream. Things slowly come into focus. An unseen MC makes the obligatory lost wallet announcement. A sound check. Instructions to an unseen engineer about what inputs to plug the keyboard into. The guy with Tony's cue cards. Once I realized what those were, I laughed out loud. Soon the viewers are transfixed too. Not by the sheer star power, because we haven't even seen that yet. We're enchanted by how normal all this is. It's like the county fair we went to, sat on our dad's shoulders with a melting snow cone in our hand. Summer of Soul spotlights nuggets of Black history that we weren't taught in school. I don't know about you, but I grew up in rural-ass America. I only heard fleeting mentions of Malcolm X, always in relation to Dr. King. I didn't study Gil Scott-Heron until college. I didn't learn about the Black Panthers until after college. The audience booing the moon landing is so damn funny. Even Questlove was like, why are they booing the moon? Because, according to the concert attendees, the government could have used that same funding to improve conditions in their own backyard. It's really remarkable how similar these issues are to the ones we're facing today. Hello, Apartheid Clyde and his weird obsession with going to Mars. A lot of this Black history is told through music, through gospel music. Summer of Soul illuminates Black people's relationship to Christianity. The church is Black culture. Dressing in your Sunday best, cookouts, gospel music, dance as a part of worship, and possession by the Holy Spirit. That came from Africa and the Caribbean. Jesus looked out for society's others, and the church is, or should be, a place where nobody is an other. Belief in a higher power is uniquely human, considering the horrors that Black history is marked by. Belief in God and the structure of church is a therapy. Al Sharpton said, quote, "We didn't know anything about therapists, but we knew Mahalia Jackson." Mahalia and Mavis tearing up Precious Lord as a highlight for sure. With the edit, it underscores the gravity of MLK's assassination, even over a year later. According to Questlove, this scene was very nearly the end of the film. But I have to be honest and admit, since I didn't grow up in the church, I missed a lot of the gravity the gospel section would have had to another viewer. The standout performance for this viewer was the Fifth Dimension performing the hair medley. I know what you're thinking. Why would corny choreography, ugly orange vests, and woo-woo lyrics about Jupiter aligning with Mars bring you to tears? It's because we hear how earnestly the Fifth Dimension believed in this song, and the age of Aquarius is now. Pluto moved into Aquarius in November, and it's gonna stay there for the next few decades. It's like the flying cars thing, right? How could a time that so many people had such high hopes for become so rotten, corrupted, and doomed? To a modern viewer like you and me, it's kinda devastating. It's why I got so fucked up over the janitor scene in Woodstock. It's a burst of real life in a dream. Do I think the Summer of Soul team answer the question of why the Harlem Cultural Festival was forgotten? Not really. That's one of the film's greatest pitfalls. I'm not doubting Black erasure at all. It's happening right now in front of our very eyes. Google removed Black History Month from its calendar. And for why? Storage space my ass. But I really wish Summer of Soul had delved more into Black erasure as it pertains to the Harlem Cultural Festival. No more than 1 minute of the runtime was devoted to this. The whole thing was written off as no one would buy the footage and the powers that be not wanting it remembered. As a viewer who is now invested, which is what you want with a film, a successful documentary gets its audience invested in the story, this is a letdown. Questlove said in an interview the original edit of Summer of Soul was over 3 hours. You're telling me we couldn't have gotten 2 or 3 more minutes for this? Did Summer of Soul fall short in that aspect? Yes, but did it fulfill its main objective of telling Black history through people and music? Absolutely. Before moving on to the next chapter, I want to make quick note of this film's subtitle, or When the Revolution Could Not Be Televised. It references Gil Scott-Heron's iconic piece of the same name, which was recently catapulted back into pop culture consciousness by Kendrick Lamar in his performance at America's ultimate bread and circus event.
The revolution about to be televised. You picked the right time, but the wrong guy.
Now that we've gotten through my thoughts on that Summer of Soul, what do I think of this Summer of Soul? Going in, I had no idea about the Harlem Cultural Festival or Summer of Soul until one of you viewers intervened. Once I googled it and saw the Black Woodstock tagline attached to it, I was like, okay, I have to know more about this. So I guess, in a sense, the Black Woodstock name worked. To get this out of the way now, no, I don't think the Harlem Cultural Festival was truly the Black Woodstock. The Harlem Cultural Festival took place over 6 weeks, while Woodstock was just 4 days. One was on a farm, the other in a city park. Woodstock produced something like 175 hours of footage. They did not put the cameras down until Pete Townsend told them to. The Harlem Cultural Festival produced just 40 hours. It was a clean and concise effort. The Harlem Cultural Fest was better organized, better staged, it was cleaner, it was safer. The only things Woodstock and the Cultural Festival have in common are Sly and the Family Stone and the fact that no reported cases of interpersonal violence occurred. At an event in the middle of Harlem, infamous to outsiders for supposedly being this violent place, there were no assaults, no rapes, no murders. Why did Hal have such trouble selling the footage? It's because they didn't have more acts that appealed to white people. That was the unfortunate reality of a music industry that was still largely A, segregated, and B, geared towards the buying habits of white people. The Harlem Cultural Festival was for Black people, by Black people. And Mayor John Lindsay. John's like the Mark in this situation. Harlem rocked with John because John rocked with them.
You know what I'm saying? Which, I'm rocking with Mark because Mark is rocking with us.
But in all seriousness, the Fifth Dimension and Sly were exceptions, not the rule. Aside from them, the Harlem Cultural Festival didn't have crossover appeal as far as 1969 industry standards were concerned. Had they had, say, Jimi Hendrix on the bill, Hal would have had no problem selling the footage. Like the film, the Summer of Soul soundtrack has an angle. Unless it's straight up field recordings, there's no such thing as a pure documentary on film or on disc. Woodstock's soundtrack condenses the experience, so a listener who couldn't be on Yasgur's farm and couldn't rewatch the film endlessly, remember this was 1970, streaming didn't exist, got a taste of the experience. But that soundtrack was an over-embellished mess. Questlove condensed the film experience as well. There's the obligatory crowd noises, we hear from Tony Lawrence, the heart of Harlem, Soulsville, USA. But Questlove does something really fucking cool that might not have worked had he not been producing it. He makes all the songs flow into each other like they were performed back to back. There's only a few crowd announcements after Tony's introduction, no rain chants, just 80 minutes of the Summer of Soul. While most of side 2 kind of flies over my head, again, I didn't grow up in the church, side 1 kicks off with a bang. After Tony welcomes us to the festival, the Chambers Brothers welcome us to the groove and shake of Harlem. He sings of the landmarks, the people, the black-eyed peas, ribs, and collard greens. Since the festival was practically in these people's backyards, concert goers could just bring food from home. Musa Jackson called it the ultimate black barbecue. I'm not sure how I haven't talked about them more on this series, but the rhythm section of George Chambers and Brian Keenan is nuts. If you're at the Harlem Cultural Festival, you'd better deliver a good drum solo. Brian's is the perfect length, punchy and varied. If I'm not mistaken, this is only one of 2 honest-to-goodness guitar solos on the record. It's reflective of this not being just a rock festival. One of Summer of Soul's greatest strengths is how it tells Black history through music. Why I Sing the Blues was the perfect song choice from B.B. King. This recording is unusually short. The studio versions are between 5 and 8 minutes long. I like how this live energy altered BB's playing. When I think of him, I don't think of flashy energy. I think slow, methodical mastery, like his song about his guitar named Lucille. BB's stage presence was incredible. You hear it on the record. With the way he bellows, he makes you believe he's been around since the 1800s. I first got the blues, they brought me over on a ship. The blues tradition started with the transatlantic slave trade. While slaves spoke many different languages, music was the universal language. After slaves were freed, the blues continues. They're priced out of good neighborhoods and forced into shoddy housing. I heard the rats tell the bedbugs to give the roaches some. In the film, we see how Harlem experienced this. The city let their infrastructure fall apart. A little more of Tony and his Soulsville, USA bit delivers us right into the Fifth Dimension's Harlem debut. It's kind of amazing to hear these guys at their peak. They were promoting Age of Aquarius at this time. The Hair medley wound up being the biggest single of that year. Vocally, this isn't their best moment, but I can't really fault them. It was hot as hell on that west-facing stage in their polyester bell-bottoms. I already touched on the emotional gravity of this song in the last chapter. It's one hell of a moment to have so early in the film, and one hell of a moment to have round out the first side of a double album. Songs like Don't You Hear Me Callin' To Ya and Age of Aquarius make me wish the Harlem Cultural Festival backing bands got a little more love. The Fifth Dimension are rocking a kick-ass flautist. Kicking off side 2 is Motown heartthrob David Ruffin with his old group's greatest hit, My Girl. I can't help but wonder how the other guys felt about that. I don't know, I'm reading a book for a future podcast episode and I'm not exactly David Ruffin's biggest fan right now. My Girl was probably shooshed out to here on the sequencing for the sake of physical space on the record. His performance isn't until after Operation Breadbaskets in the film. You can hear how badly all the girls in the audience want to be that girl. The dull roar of their screaming is inescapable. Of course, David is every bit the Motown man, just enough crowd work to keep the girls screaming. He says, "I love you too, darling," to no one in particular. He's giving that one tenor in the high school theater class right now. His use of the money note is truly excessive. There is an unbelievable swagger radiating off this guy and his band. I love hearing the arrangements for saxophones and funky drums alongside the classic horns. David doesn't give a fuck about tempo. This is his song and the lyrics are gonna go on whatever beats he wants them to. This sequencing broke up David and Gladys Knight and the Pips. Gladys is bumped out to the beginning of disc 2 with the Afro-Caribbean and jazz. Of the Motown acts represented, I prefer this showing by Gladys. This is 2 years after Grapevine was a hit, and it still feels fresh. I love the interaction between her and the Pips on that. 3 of my guys went through this too. They don't just feel like her backup singers, they all feel like a unit. Mahalia and Mavis's Precious Lord is objectively incredible on film. You hear hundreds of years of history invoked by these two powerhouse women. Out of the gospel selections, the Staple Singers' It's Been a Change translates the best to record. The Staple Singers were the odd ones out. It was blues rock guitar with gospel lyrics and soul melodies. They might have had the best young singer on the bill. Mavis's tone is warm, rich, and resonant. Their vocal blend was bar none. That's just a natural advantage family groups will always have. The sound of your voice is genetic, so families tend to sound the same. Considering Santana are one of my favorite Woodstock groups, I love Latin and Afro-Caribbean inspired rock music. On to the section I was most excited about. While the charm of Woodstock was how messy and off the cuff everything is, with the Harlem Cultural Festival, there is not one string out of tune, not one beat missed. Both Mongo and Ray's ensembles, however, are a cut above the rest. Excellence above excellence. Unbelievable chemistry, which this kind of music requires. It's a shout to Spanish Harlem, all the clubs there and the music that came out of them. The park was practically right there. With both Mongo Santamaria and Ray Barretto on the 1969 bill, I couldn't help but wonder about Tito Puente. Sure enough, he played the Harlem Cultural Festival in '68. I like to think Tito recommended his sidemen for this. Mongo and Ray approach their instruments so differently. It comes from different cultures, of course. Mongo was Cuban, Ray Nuyorican. Mongo's Watermelon Man is an instrumental. Aside from airy chants, this song saunters through and sweeps you up in the rhythm. Ray sings together. The lyrics paint a picture of the melting pot that is Spanish Harlem. It urges people not to let physical differences define them, as we all want the same thing, and we've gotta work together before it's too goddamn late. A lot of labels of otherness apply to him. Black, red, Puerto Rican, Indian. This is me, Ray Barretto. I know a beautiful truth, he says. I laughed when he was just like, I'm all messed up, but I got soul. The charisma on this man should be studied by scientists. His secret, his otherness, is what links him to everyone in that crowd. The blood of mankind flows in me, and so in every face I see, a part of you and you and you and me together. Ray makes a jab at the moon landing too. I love this running joke. Not unlike Santana with Soul Sacrifice, within the minute, I'm in it. And to get both these immersive experiences back to back is incredible. Rounding out side 3 is Herbie Mann's Hold On I'm Coming. I can't get over hearing Herbie's breath as he tears the shit out of that flute. He sounds like he's alive and trapped in my disc. I love some vibraphone as well. Sonny Sharrock kicks ass on his guitar solo, but I really wish this weren't the only straight jazz cut. Give me a whole side of a disc for Hold On to feel at home on. Here we are, another one of my favorite groups at Woodstock, Sly and the Family Stone. Everyone there is just as excited to hear him as me. As soon as Tony cries, "Sly!" the crowd just erupts. I feel sorry for whoever has to play before and after these guys. They blow anyone out of the fucking water. This set was a mess, but man is it a killer. The scatting on Sing a Simple Song, the gritty guitar tone, the keyboard just breaking halfway through a song. Sly's vocals are on point, but he's clipping the mic all over the place. Cynthia Robertson goes back and forth between the buzzing trumpet and just cranking those vocals out. After 3 sides of musical perfection, the Family Stone's sloppiness doesn't feel unprofessional or shoddy. Quite the opposite. It feels like pure expression, an absolute release of energy that builds up and up and up until it explodes. Everyday People is followed up with Max Roach and Abby Lincoln performing a show-stopping version of John Coltrane's Africa. With the past few acts and the subject matter of their songs, Black history has been taken up to the modern day. Africa tells the tale of the African diaspora. The narrator never feels at home anywhere, longing to return to the land of their ancestors. Abby's vocal performance slowly builds from restrained vocal inflections to passionate screams. Finally, Nina Simone. Both Backlash Blues and Are You Ready act as a foil to B.B. King's Why I Sing the Blues. Both songs are a defiant stance against institutionalized racism. Backlash pretty plainly states the methods employers, landlords, and the government use to keep Black people in communities like Harlem. You raise my taxes, freeze my wages, send my only son to Vietnam. Nevertheless, Nina rises above and dishes it right back. Sock it to them where they live so they have no place to hide. I love how precise and pointed she is on the line, "Keep on working till they open up the door." She weaves her voice through her piano. She bangs on those keys at those stop times, commanding attention. Looking at the social media response to Summer of Soul, I'm shocked more people weren't up in arms over Are You Ready? This is an incendiary poem with a strong message, right to the core of Blackness in 1969. Nina says, if the system doesn't serve you, burn it down. Create out of nothing. She urges self-love as defiant and revolutionary. Gosh, even the way she speaks is melodic. Notably missing from this soundtrack is her performance of To Be Young, Gifted, and Black. Given how pivotal a moment this is in the film, for the life of me, I cannot think of why it would be excluded. And why the hell isn't Stevie Wonder here? This soundtrack was a victim of the edit. Summer of Soul could have very easily warranted a triple album. Give me some more Ray Barretto and some more Mongo to fill a whole side. Some Hugh Masekela, more Herbie Mann. The Woodstock soundtrack featured Ravi Shankar. Why can't I hear a selection or two from the traditional African performers? This is the eternal dilemma of the soundtrack album. Where does it end? If you want a condensed version of the Summer of Soul story to take home with you, lovingly put on your turntable, set aside 80 minutes a day to experience and admire, you can't ask for much more than this. In order to properly round out this video, I'm gonna circle back to the film this album came from. A pretty major moment I conveniently left out. In interview with the National Museum of American History, Questlove said, quote, "At the end of the day, it's about crafting a really good, compelling story that touches all people, not just music buffs or history buffs, but it gets to the human experience of it all. No Summer of Soul scene better tapped into the human experience than those last couple minutes with Musa Jackson. With tears in his eyes, he leans in and says, 'I'm not crazy.' After over 50 years, this man's lived experience was finally validated. He didn't just see history on that screen. He didn't just relive a memory. He got a piece of his life back." I'm gonna go off script for a moment here, because I know my comment section and I know this is gonna come up. Abby, you're a white chick. Why are you telling this story? Because I see it important. The people who need to hear this story most, they would listen if the person telling the story looked like me. I have a responsibility. Summer of Soul isn't just a story of erasure, though that's no doubt a reason why its story went untold for so long. It's a cross-section of Black history as it stood in 1969, one of the most important years in American history, and it's told in humanity's universal language: song. It's a story of bright colors, culture, real people who just so happened to pass through history on some random summer Sunday afternoon. While Woodstock was peace, love, and music, Black Woodstock was defiance, resilience, love, and joy. With this film and soundtrack, Questlove shows us it deserves to be preserved, not just in American history, but human history, just as Woodstock was. The story of the 3rd annual Harlem Cultural Festival tells us that no matter what good we're fighting for, it may take some time. Months, years, decades. It may seem like the light at the end of the tunnel is getting farther away from you, or that the light has gone out. Like all the odds are stacked against you. The powers that be conspire against you and your joy. But the voices of Summer of Soul promise us that if we hold on to that dream, in time, we can clear even the highest of hurdles. My personal favorites off this one are Why I Sing the Blues, Age of Aquarius and Let the Sun Shine In, Together, Sing a Simple Song, Africa, and Backlash Blues. Remember, if you want to hear all of my favorites from all of the Vinyl Mondays, I have a Spotify playlist linked in my description. I update it every week. And that's it! That is the Summer of Soul film and soundtrack review. What do you think of Summer of Soul? What do you think of Summer of Soul? Leave a comment letting me know. I love hearing what you guys have to say about albums that I love. And remember, despite what some guy on the internet says, your opinion matters. If you like what I do here, you should like this video and subscribe to my channel. I post new episodes of Vinyl Monday, Monday mornings at 11, and a new episode of the Dolls podcast every other Friday at noon. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next week. Bye! I did in fact press record. Good job, AD.